Friday, everybody. Well, it looks like we're live. Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, where we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to draw together. So this is what we're working on today. This is the Stormy Sea. So the idea behind here is what we're working on is kind of capturing the mood, the energy, the movement of the ocean here from this still photograph. And so there's a lot that we can learn from this photograph. And I think, of course, if you can draw from life, that is probably going to give you the greatest benefit. But in this case, I'm in Colorado. We don't have this scene available to us anywhere close. So I'm going to have to make do with the photograph. And it allows us to really get into the nuances of the ocean and see what we can kind of learn about the way the water moves here. So if you're new, you're going to want to know that this show is all about us drawing together. So each week we choose a new subject with the idea that it's going to help us develop our skills in a particular way. And so feel free to use whatever medium you want. Feel free to change this however you'd like. This is all about simply practicing and developing our skills. For me, for example, I'm using this to help me improve my landscape paintings, because that's typically what I do. And drawing is a great way to get there. And having a regular drawing habit helps to improve our skills, not only in drawing, but in so many other ways. It helps us to see, it helps build hand-eye coordination, it helps us to engage with mediums, various media in new ways. And so feel free to sit back and watch, draw along. If you do draw along, I really would love to see your work. So I pinned a link at the top of the chat. It's also in the description below me, where you can share your work on artistnetwork.com. So check out the Drawing Together page there. You'll find the reference in the link below in the description there. So feel free to, again, bring that up, follow along. I'm going to talk through what I do, but I also like to hear from you and see what strategies you use. If you get stuck somewhere, how do you get through that? How might your approach differ from mine? Feel free to ask any questions about what I'm doing and to throw out any observations that might help me improve as well. So you all have done a fantastic job of helping me through some trouble spots. So I welcome any and all observations. It's a very welcoming and engaged audience here. So I love seeing all the familiar names, people from around the world. I love to see new names as well. So if you are new, shout out where you're viewing from. All right, let's get to it. What am I working on today? So this is a cotton rag paper. This is the Somerset paper made by Legion. Check that out. So I prefer cotton rag papers, and so I've been going through a variety of those made by Legion. So they have the Rives BFK, they have Coventry, they have Pescia, they have so many different types, and I think it's worth it to experiment with them. And so if you're ordering that paper, you might choose like a single sheet of a variety of them and get a feel for how they might work differently. I've really started to enjoy this Somerset. And it's hard to articulate the quality until you kind of get your hands on it. What I like about the rag papers is that they have a tooth, so they hold the material, but there's also a softness to it. And so what I'm looking for in the papers is really kind of how does it affect the medium? How does it interact with the medium, the charcoal or the graphite or whatever? And what qualities does it kind of extract out of that medium? And what I like about the Somerset is there's a softness to it. And some other papers, like a smoother surface, might kind of highlight the sharpness of the medium that you're using. In this case, I'll be using graphite. So just kind of, again, want to kind of throw that out there, that we can often kind of forget that really half of the drawing is paper, right? We kind of focus on the actual medium that we're drawing with, the graphite, the charcoal, markers, colored pencil, etc. But it's all about the interaction between that material and the surface, and then your role as the artist in orchestrating that relationship. And so take some time to really kind of explore the varieties of options out there and see what works for you. So if you have a favorite paper that you like to work with, I'd love to hear about it. Kind of shout out what it is you work with and why. All right, back to materials. What am I working with? I'm working with graphite today. So I've got, I love these Cezanne pencils, a really nice soft set. For those of you who have been with me for a while know that I have a bias towards the softer graphites. So this set by Cezanne, actually I have it right here. This is from Jerry's here, but it has a range. You can see the 2H is the hardest. 12B is the softest. So it's definitely a kind of a softer set than you might find. I'm enjoying it. So what I have is I have a B, which is going to be my hardest, which is a kind of a mid-ranged graphite. We have the 8B for the darkest areas, and then a 3B for some of the mid areas. So I'll work my way up from the hard to the soft. But I'm also going to introduce, I've got a set of these Derwent XL graphites, and they come in a variety of tones, or not tones, colors here. So you have the green, you have of blue, so they're kind of shifted in terms of their hue. But I'm actually going to use this soft graphite. They have an extra soft as well. Let me pull that out here and set this aside. I'm kind of nervous to use it because I've been practicing with it a little bit, but I haven't done it on camera, so we'll see how it works out. It worked well in some of the test runs that I gave it. I have my trusty blending stump, use that all the time. And then erasers, I've got a variety here, so I'm going to use my Derwent, this retractable one that I have kind of sharpened down to a fine point, but I also have this accurate eraser, which I really enjoy. This is a mechanical one that can help get in there and really pull out some nice value there. And of course, my kneaded eraser. So that's all the materials. If you have any questions, I have the link in the description below. You'll find the list of materials there as well. So, Jackie, all right, you use those as well. Yeah, they're a lot of fun. I like them. So let me see. I'm going to try to articulate, what's happening on the page as best I can as I'm going through it. All right. So the setup, I've got the small thumbnail right here below me, so that's what I'm going to be drawing from primarily, but I have a larger version of it up here on my left. All right. Brenda's art, the Derwent XL blocks are amazing. I do drawings with them, just with them. They're water soluble as well. Oh, that's awesome. I haven't tried them with a brush, but that sounds amazing. So yeah, I'm really excited. The few tests that I've done, they're really nice and smooth. But how do I want to do this? I'm a little scattered at the moment. So again, that's part of what drawing does, is it helps bring us into focus. So the first thing that kind of stood out to me about this image is recognizing that from past experience, that relationship between the sky that's going to be at the top area and then the white caps there, the sea foam at the bottom, that value relationship could be tricky. And so I want to kind of address that right off the bat. So I'll use this big one, this XL, and start to just kind of build up some tone. And I really like the way it engages with a rag paper. You can see a bit of the tooth come through if you're kind of curious about that paper. And what I like about this scene is that it allows us to kind of engage with that part of our brains that might just want to have fun making marks. And we talk about that a lot in this show, is that one of the things that we're in control of as artists is how we decide what our relationship is between ourselves and the subject matter. Do we want to make the drawing look identical to the photograph? Do we want to use a photograph as a way to kind of jump off and become more kind of loose, expressive, and impressionistic? And so what I'm doing right now in kind of a gestural way is kind of reacting to the form in an abstract way. And so when using this block, it really becomes, you can see I'm using the full side of it because I want those broad strokes. It helps me to think about these forms as large shapes. If I think about it as drawing lines, I interact with the objects differently. And in this way, in this case, I really want to be thinking about it abstractly for now. And so when I have it flat on the surface here, the control I have is with the pressure. So I can put an even pressure down, I can bear down on it, I can let it just kind of float across the surface, and I can kind of rock it a bit, giving myself the ability to kind of lean in on that harder edge, or kind of pull back and have a nice soft kind of broad mark. But if I look at the reference image through kind of blurred eyes, I see just an arrangement of shapes. And what I'm kind of going to evaluate then on the page as I go along is, does that arrangement of shapes feel pleasing? Does it feel balanced? Does it express something about the emotion of the scene? Is it something that I react to? And does it reveal anything, again, about the subject or about the work that might encourage me to kind of push it in one direction or another? So when we talk about kind of a pleasing arrangement of shapes, there are some subjects that may not call for a pleasant arrangement. So if you're really trying to create something that's moody and kind of expresses the movement and the energy of the ocean, maybe you want something that's a little bit off balanced, or maybe you want something that feels very balanced and stable as a composition. But I want to kind of throw that out there, that something that I contemplate a lot is, that we don't always, sometimes the subject itself or the emotive quality that we're trying to create in the artwork requires a certain amount of imbalance, and we can sometimes forget that we have that control as artists. All right, so as it is right now, as I'm going through it now, as the gesture starts to emerge, one of the things I'm trying to lock in on is, does it at this stage in some way express the scene? So what I think the approach that I'm going to take today is to try to really capture the quality of the scene at every stage. So trying to hit it quickly off the bat and then simply refine it as we go. And so there's a lot of kind of peripheral drawing happening here, which means that as I'm looking at the screen in front of me shows me what you're actually seeing. So I see myself, I see the thumbnail below me, and I see the large drawing. So I'm focusing on that thumbnail that's right below me, but putting my awareness on what's happening in the action on the page. So there's movement happening here, and I can kind of see out of my periphery what's happening on the page. And so I'm kind of splitting my attention a little bit, but keeping my gaze fixed on the reference image and trying to simply react to it. And again, what I said kind of at the top of the show is that what drawing allows us to do is it helps us to develop and manage a certain amount of hand-eye coordination, allowing our observations to quickly translate from our eyes, the light passing into our eyes, being processed by our brain, coming down our arm into the material onto the surface. All that's happening in one movement as much as possible. And if you're new to drawing, it can feel uncomfortable because we often don't quite have that level of kind of a carefree quality of drawing, just allowing it to happen. And if you're at that stage where you're kind of tightening up and you're feeling a certain amount of tension in that, then this might be a good scene to really just try loosening up and allow the proportions to kind of vary, move all over the place, and kind of just get comfortable creating movement. Because this is a scene that's, it's frozen in time, but of a scene that is constantly changing. No wave is going to be identical. And we're never going to be able to put ourselves in this location and see exactly the scene. And so this is an opportunity for us to simply kind of capture the spirit and the movement of that location. And so be a little bit free to, again, just simply focus on building that hand-eye coordination. And so as I'm using this block now, and I'm starting to create smaller shapes, you can start to kind of tilt it and start to engage kind of with the corner of it a little bit more, or just the short side. But as I'm doing it, rather than thinking about drawing a line, trying to imagine a linear path that we're placing the block on, and then moving the block along that path. So in this way, we're starting to develop a scene. It almost kind of looks like one of those really old photographs, like a you know, the glass plate negative type of kind of tin type or something that may have a limited amount of detail, but there's just something really you know, fun about pushing the material around like this. And as this horizon line is coming together, it kind of brings to mind the idea that you know, when we're looking at this scene, we take in that whole horizon line only when we really allow our eyes to lose focus. We kind of step back and try to see the scene in its totality. And otherwise, when we look in a focused way, we can only see one portion at a time. And I kind of bring that up because what that allows us to do is think about kind of possibly breaking up that edge. Sometimes we feel like we have to be overly clear in defining that edge and making one solid, straight, consistent edge along there. But you might see what happens if you actually break that up, you know, create it in pieces that may not align just right. And as long as you step back and your brain kind of accepts it as a continual path, it'll read as a horizon line. All right. Oh, Brent, sorry, I could have used the blue one. That didn't even occur to me that I could have used the blue graphite. I guess I just got into a habit there. I should experiment with that at some point. All right, so one of the things that I'm noticing right now, I'm evaluating, is this mass of rock, and it's a little bit shifted over to the left. So if I look at the distance there, I feel like this could come over a little bit, this point of rock here. And this kind of, it helps me to, I think about my painting a lot when I'm drawing and how I might actually paint this if I were on location. So this aligns with how I might actually start an oil painting, although I don't have a whole lot of experience drawing waves, painting waves. I've had more experience drawing them. I kind of, in my imagination here, as I'm playing that scenario out, this is how I would block in an oil painting at this stage. Although I might have color as a part of that process. So I can kind of lean on that a little bit more. I kind of like the way the rock kind of undercuts right there. There's that sharp angle that creates an implied edge here that closes off that corner and brings us into the composition. And so we have this kind of, that turn that kind of brings us into that composition there, and then it contrasts nicely about this kind of implied diagonal across here. So right now, thinking in terms of abstraction, just now starting to evaluate the composition. And now one of the things that I did this in the preparatory drawing, wherever that ended up, over here as well. I brought this wave here forward a little bit, and I wish I could say that was intentional. It wasn't. I kind of, as I recognized it towards the end of the drawing, I'm like, I kind of like it the way it is, so I'm going to leave it. But I just kind of want to point that out. You can kind of see that crest there has come forward a bit, and I feel like it's too close now, just based on the form, so I might need to push that back a little bit. But I kind of bring that up as you're working through your own drawing. You might start to create that strategy for yourself. Where do you want those focal points to be? Because this rock is going to be a focal point. For me, that cresting wave here becomes one. It's one of the few areas in the scene where we actually have a form that we can lock onto, and then it's balanced by the waves on this side. And so you create this kind of triangle of focal points, of areas where our eyes can rest and recognize the object. If you remove those aspects in the reference image, it really just becomes this more amorphous blob. You know, there's just a lot of texture and movement and color, but no real identifiable form, but you have those three areas. And so you might think for yourself, how do you want those to play out? In the reference photo, this back here, this one here is a little bit farther away than what I did in my preparatory drawing. I think I brought it too far forward in this early gesture, so I'm gonna see if I can kind of carve into it a little bit. And perhaps, you know what I'm noticing now is that there's this edge here on the rock that creates an implied line that leads right back to that cresting wave in the reference. And I think I want that to be an element. And then you carry the crest of this wave here over to this one. And there's that sea foam here that kind of gently carries us up. And then you have the sky up there. Just trying to think through some of the things that are running through my head as I evaluate it. And some of these compositional decisions happen very quickly. And that's not always a good thing. Sometimes it's sometimes it works out well to kind of go with your instinct. And sometimes that initial instinct is just not fully formed. And I've had many projects where I go confidently towards in a direction with regards to the composition, and forget to kind of question it until the end and realize it's way off base. I got a painting that I'm working on right now that I started that I thought was pretty solid in terms of the composition, and now I realize that it's not. So just kind of be open to allowing some of those things to change. So as I bring out this paper towel here, just kind of smoothing that out. So I'm actually going to draw with the paper towel, kind of with my fingers here. And allowing the movement, if anything, to kind of express the movement of the waves. And even if it's not happening, it's not doing anything on the paper itself, it can kind of help you kind of engage with some of the subtle qualities of those waves. And we start to really pay attention to what's happening to the movement from one layer of waves to the next. So just kind of playing that out a little bit. And I kind of like that, the way this wave kind of wraps around here. All right. Ooh, started with charcoal. Can I switch to graphite? This could be a good opportunity to explore that, to see if it works. I've not had luck with that in the past, but generally I found it easier to switch from charcoal to graphite than graphite to charcoal, just because graphite is kind of a smoother material. It often reduces the tooth on the paper, so then the charcoal doesn't have much to grab onto. So you might give that a shot and let us all know how it turns out. Hello from Sweden. All right. Looks like Nora, welcome. Sorry, I need the screen's a little bit small here, so it takes me a little while to read some of these comments here. So, yeah, Brent Desart says stay with charcoal. Yeah, I'd say go for it. Let's just see what happens with the charcoal. Yeah, and if you don't, it was a real toss up for me to either work with graphite today or charcoal. And again, I don't know as if I had a really valid reason. I just chose graphite. And I think part of it is like when I think about the ocean, there's a steeliness to it. And that feels to me like it aligns really well with graphite, that has that kind of silvery quality. So, and unfortunately, I don't have the painting that I can grab right now. Mad Moments Go, but I'll see if I can post that somewhere. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to do some subtractive drawing here with my eraser now. Actually, I'm going to use my Kneaded eraser to see if that lifts anything. Not a whole lot, so I'm going to switch to the rubber eraser. And so right now my primary focus is on arranging these 3 areas of mass that will serve as generally as the focal point. I'm going to knock that down there. So I'm just trying to kind of feel my way through some of these marks. It's not doing a whole lot right now, but I'm trying to organize my thoughts a little bit. And I think here's what I want to do actually. I'm going to bring this back. I want this edge here to be something that is pleasing. And I feel like right now it's a little flat. And if I look at the reference for any sort of help here, there's this nice cut in the rock right there that makes this form fairly pleasing here. So I'm trying to think through some of these forms there. And trying to stay focused on just the abstract qualities of these things. And I'm finding that this block is really, it's a lot of fun to work with. And it just helps me to, to kind of stay focused on abstract forms. So as I darken that, it's kind of making me realize how dark it is over here. And it's just kind of, you have these lines of the sea foam that are visually interesting. And I'm just going to kind of react to those rather than really calculate them. I'm mostly concerned with just creating a sense of balance and seeing how that affects the flow from the bottom. One of the things I've been trying to develop in my understanding of composition is how important that bottom edge of either the canvas or the paper is, or the bottom edge of the composition, how things enter from the bottom. That's just been an area that I've been focusing on. And so this kind of brings that to mind, the way I can kind of reinforce this value contrast here, and then this wave that wraps around and it creates an edge that allows us to enter in from the bottom and quickly wrap around. And then again, we have these 3 focal points that give our eyes something to lock onto. And the darker edge there. All right, so, and then I have Derwent Graphite 05. Is that dark enough? I don't know. I think so. Like I have a bit of a preference or bias towards the softer graphites, but that may not be for you all as well. And part of that is just for the sake of the camera, that it shows up a little bit better than some of the light ones. We've worked with with graphite in the past, and sometimes these early stages, there's not much to see. The camera doesn't capture some of those light marks. So I'm kind of enjoying the block charcoal here because it allows me to jump quickly into kind of the substance of the material. It shows up nicely. All right. So I'm going to kind of move away from this, kind of focus on the sky. So starting with the kneaded eraser here, I'm just using a really light touch, and I'm kind of both blending and erasing as I'm going. So I'm trying to use the eraser as a bit of a blending tool and then leaning in on it where I need to lift a little bit. And what I'm enjoying at this stage is how those edges just get kind of lost, how the sky and the sea seem to kind of unify a little bit on those edges. Then Eric is asking, name the erasers again. So I've got my kneaded eraser here. I've got a rubber eraser. This is the Derwent retractable eraser that I carved down to that sharp point. That gives me that chisel tip. That's going to come in handy when I work on those waves. And then I've got this Accurate mechanical eraser here, which this is a USB chargeable one that you can find at Jerry's Artorama. So I think I'm gonna kind of go for mood in this drawing, and I'm kind of articulating that out loud for myself. So I'm making a verbal commitment because I can often kind of switch tracks, kind of midstream, kind of start a drawing and say I want this to be, just like the reference photo, and then start out drawing that way, and then halfway through say I don't want that, and then kind of change direction, and then kind of move back, and then that can sometimes muddy the whole process. And so I'm kind of saying that aloud and hoping that you'll keep me accountable. So I want this to kind of reference the photo, but again, there's something I'm engaging with in this side. It's different than what we're seeing in the reference, and I'm wanting to keep that for now. It just kind of creates this interesting mood, and I like the way that if we eliminate any sort of focal element here, this just becomes this gray abstraction, and it can be a fun experiment to see, well, how little can you get away with? If you start to add some refinement in some of these areas. What is ultimately necessary? As you start to add some of those refinements, just try to push that limit a little bit. So if I start to refine some of these cloud forms here, using the graphite on its side here, this is the B, so this is my hardest graphite, not the hardest that's available, but the hardest that I've chosen. Again, because I have a bit of a bias towards the softer graphites. What I like about using that block is that it helps to provide a nice layer on the paper. So again, this is that Somerset rag that Legion paper makes, and it really engages with the material nicely. So some things are just happening with the mediums, they're just happening on the page, and then I have to evaluate, is it serving the drawing? Do I like it? Or do I need to control it a little bit more to make it more like the reference photo? There's some really kind of nice texture in the clouds here that I want to create here to, again, give something for the eyes to lock on in the sky, but not so much that it becomes a distraction. When we think about composition, it's a key factor is contrast. It's when we as viewers engage with something visual, like an image or website or graphic design, what often we're looking for is contrast. That gives us the visual cues about where to look, where to go, and how to navigate. It's different than when we read. We kind of know, depending on the part of the world we're in, in the language, we know where to start reading. So here in the West, I'll open up a book, you start in the upper left and you work your way across, and down the page, right? So we know what to do with that information. We know how to engage with the marks on the page and extract that information. When it's an image, there is no kind of standard that we can rely on like that. And so it's often a matter of contrast. You know, we'll be attracted to areas of high contrast, and then the visual elements, you know, the lines, the shapes, values, form, texture, all of those things are giving our brains clues of where to go, what to do with this information, and how to navigate that. And so what we're doing as we're evaluating the shapes, as we're evaluating the composition, is then thinking, what will the viewer do when they get here? What cues are we giving to their brains that will help them kind of move through the composition? So I'm seeing kind of these forms here that are feeling a little bit too repetitive. So I want to break that up. It creates a little bit more variety there. And in part because that goes back to what I was just saying, those repetitive forms are generally something that will draw the attention. And so I don't want that sky to, again, be distracting. I want it to feel very natural. And maybe actually, oops, kind of bring a little bit of this light over, make it a little bit more asymmetrical. Mad Moments Go saying, I see the abstract shapes and values when I half close my eyes. It helps a lot. Yes. So we talk about that a lot on the show. So and I forgot to kind of mention that, so I'm glad you did. So at this point, throughout this entire process, my eyes have been out of focus. It helps me to see the abstract forms, and it's just become second nature for me at this point. And so I kind of forgot that. Now, so if you're kind of new to that whole process, you might practice a variety of ways of reducing that focus. So in this case, I'm just letting my eyes almost focus on a spot right here in front of me. And it's just relaxing my eyes, letting it lose focus. Squinting also is a way to reduce that focus, and it limits the amount of light that enters your eyes. And that affects the value relationships that you're going to observe. And then opening your eyes wide and allowing more light to flood in while keeping the subject out of focus, it gives you another look at those value relationships. And so if you practice looking at that subject in a variety of ways, squinting, opening your eyes, letting them lose focus, looking them with sharp focus, each time you do, it's going to be different, but you're going to have a deeper and richer understanding of the subject. So you kind of practice that and it just becomes second nature, and you'll kind of build an intuition as to when you need to focus, when you need to kind of relax your eyes and go from there. So all right, welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm going to try that tinted charcoal, Brent, there. I'm kind of kicking myself now, now that you mentioned it. But again, those habits, right? All right, just kind of that, there's a bit of light there that was distracting me. Okay. All right, now, Susan, made the comment, I like the perspective you're creating. And I'm really glad you brought up that term, because now that's kind of the stage right now where I need to start evaluating. I've got a two-dimensional arrangement of these forms, these abstract shapes. It's starting to create the suggestion of this seascape here. Now I need to be thinking about it three-dimensionally, about that plane leading back. And that perspective is going to be a challenge. When we're dealing with a road or something architectural, you have rectangular elements, and you can use 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, etc., to create that depth. The other tools you can use to create depth are overlapping of form and the diminishing in scale of these forms. Now, in this case, you know, it's the scale that is probably going to be the biggest thing. You know, but those cresting waves are all different shapes and sizes as you move back towards that horizon. So the the distance between them is going to play a big role in the angle of that plane there. So it takes some time to look at the reference photo and really evaluate the spacing between, you know, this, say this cresting wave here, which becomes a bit of a focal point. And then as we move back to that other, there's another kind of waveform here. So what I'm noticing is that this eraser is picking up some of that graphite. So you might just have to kind of wipe it, clean it off a little bit. But there's this waveform here. So in this vertical distance here, we've moved back essentially one row of waves. Now, if we take that same distance and move up the page here, we can observe that we can fit now maybe 3 or 4 rows of waves. And as we move back into space, we're able to fit an increasing number of rows of those waves into an increasingly smaller space on the page. And you know, so in that way, like at this point, you can intentionally kind of calculate out where each of those cresting wave forms might be as they recede in space, or you can kind of build an intuition about that and just see what's happening as you go back. So now I've made these 3 marks here, and I can ask myself, what is that conveying right now? Is that creating that sense of depth? Does this pop forward? And then if I need to create kind of layers in between there to create a bit of a transition, think about gradually increasing the spacing as we come forward, gradually decreasing the spacing as we recede. And this is where that having this eraser carved with that chisel tip can be really helpful, because it you know, creates these nice sharp edges. You can kind of lean in on the corner of it a bit to lift off you know, just a little speck. I really like, there's this wave back in here that's cresting. That helps to kind of bring us up that right side. And so as I'm erasing out these waveforms, I'm using the full side of this wedge, and it's just this kind of short vibration there. And those initial marks, you can see right here, it's just kind of scraping across the surface. But then as you bear down on it, you'll feel it grab the graphite and then lift off. And some of these are too large, and so I can cut those back a little bit later. And now one of the things to kind of look at as well is as you start to lock in on those layers of waves that recede back, they're also paralleling kind of the shoreline off to the left. And we can kind of get a feel for it if we just, again, if we step back from the whole image and just kind of take in those lines, start to feel the layers of the waves and the angles. What you start to feel is that our center of vision is somewhere right along in here. As we move across, you know, if we were to imagine a straight line kind of coming up and over the waves right towards us, it would probably be somewhere right around here. And as we move across, if there were parallel lines, what they would start to do, if we were to follow the rules of perspective, is they would start to pivot and rotate out from a vanishing point here. So I'm kind of envisioning a focal point, a vanishing point up here, and that there are these kind of implied angles that would kind of radiate out from that. And so you can start to see that play out in the waves on the upper left-hand side. They start to take on more of a horizontal nature, kind of starting to angle up towards that point. And so in this way, I'm using both the reference image as a guide and kind of my understanding of linear perspective to see if I can help really create that sense that when we're looking here, we're looking straight ahead. And when we come across the page, we're turning our head and looking across these forms over here. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, if none of this makes sense, feel free to shout out, ask me any questions. I do like to make sure that I'm speaking and articulating these thoughts effectively, and sometimes it can come out very clumsily, and I would love the opportunity to clarify some of these remarks. So, oh, Tybalt the cat just showed up. There, Tybalt. And so one of the things that is helpful over here is, you know, there's this line of sea foam. Hey, bud. I don't know if you can hear Tybalt, but he's saying hello to everybody. But that's kind of what I'm looking at. I'm realizing now that this is actually a really important stretch because it helps to establish that plane that leads away and off to the left. And so we're just kind of taking in all of that in a bit of an abstract way. And as I move back into that space, I can allow some of these eraser marks to just kind of skip across the surface there. And to create more of a straight edge, you can see that, excuse me, this arm is resting on the edge of this table. And so actually what I'm putting some attention on what's happening here and allowing that to be the guide that that helps keep that horizontal. Oh, Dementia Dave, are you? It's tough with when you're working with charcoal. Yeah, sometimes it can really just get muddy, especially with the compressed charcoal early on. I kind of like to work with vine charcoal as an initial layer, and that can sometimes allow the compressed charcoal to lift off a little bit easier. But sometimes that's where the paper can play a big role. So sometimes there are some papers that just really grab the charcoal, and then it just kind of smudges across the surface, and some that really lift it off. So you might experiment with some different papers to see if you have any different results. Otherwise, the erasers themselves can play a role in that. Like I found these vanish erasers. This is again a Jerry's product that I think it works out really well, and it's different. You are making a lot of noise down here, buddy. All right, I'm gonna put you out. Sorry about that. I'm gonna set Tybalt free. Here you go. All right. So yeah, hopefully that helps in some way. I know it's really frustrating. And I've definitely had that where you're like, oh my gosh, this charcoal is not being my friend right now. All right, so then what I'm starting to observe is that there's a kind of a break in these waves with kind of two distinct angles, one here and then one here, that interact in an interesting way. Yeah. Yeah, Tybalt, he's a character, but he wanted to be in here, and then as soon as he was in and he realized how boring this was, he wanted to get out, and the door had shut behind him. All right, so you can see actually with the eraser, I'm actually making some darker marks in along here because it's picked up some graphite. So I'm just playing around with the angle of the eraser as it becomes more kind of a shallow angle. It's just moving the graphite on the surface, so it's smudging it more than anything. And then when I need to lift, I can just rotate up, pull off a little bit more material. Yeah, and I love that. I love that little peak right there. Again, it just aligns with that movement that we want to create up along in here, along the side of the forms here. Okay. This is, I guess, I feel like I want to give a little bit more form here. There we go. Kind of highlight that horizon a little bit more. Okay. Yeah, Dave, sometimes after hours of drawing with charcoal, I've torn the paper to pieces. Who's it? There's an abstract artist that I really enjoy. And God, the name is escaping me now, but I remember seeing his drawings that it just so much erasing happening and layering on charcoal and erasing where holes have formed, and then another piece of paper just comes in behind it and he just keeps going. I've always thought that was a great way to work with charcoal. I love that relationship with the material where he keeps going with it. And so sometimes, I guess what I've done in situations like that, when I know I can't really reclaim it, then just go with it. See what happens if you say, all right, this charcoal is holding the paper, it's just gonna be a mess. Use that as an experimental sheet of paper that you can, just go for it, see what happens. One of the things that's been kind of running through my head a lot lately is that we spend so much time as artists trying to figure out how we can do it right, that it makes me want to take some time to contemplate how to do it wrong, wrong in quotes, to see what kind of new things we can develop, right? So many great things in the art world, either visual or music, etc., have been created by things that were mistakes, things that were done wrong, and then it reveals something about the material or some new kind of form of abstraction, some new take on the emotive quality of the material. So if you've done it and you feel like, hey, I've done it wrong, I say go with it. See if it reveals something about the work. All right. So still doing some subtractive drawing, trying to get a feel for where I might want to sharpen edges and where I might want to have edges that are a little bit softer. I'm working with both the kind of the small thumbnail as well as the larger reference off here to my left. Yeah, Brent Desart says, Picasso said to learn the rules as an artist and to break them like a master. Yeah, and he also kind of famously, said that he kind of wanted to work like a child, to kind of have that quality we all have as children when we're just kind of engaging with the material. And sometimes that knowledge and the expectation of doing it right kind of prevents us from experimenting. So but I think it's important, to identify, there are definitely times in my artistic practice where it was really important for me to be focused on learning things the right way, right? And there's a lot of benefit to that as well. But I think it's also, it can be healthy to shake things up sometimes and identify when you might be locked into a habit that's preventing growth and where things might need to be shaken up a bit. Okay, so as I'm going back along this area here, just looking for opportunities to use some of these white caps to reinforce the perspective there. So I'm thinking more of it about it being horizontal. Think about that horizontal quality of these layers of waves, and using the image really as a reference. So I'm looking at the relationships on the marks here, and it's not accurate if I compare it to the reference. You know, this is too large. I don't think that's in the right spot, but evaluating the drawing on its own merit to see does it create that sense of depth that is convincing, that makes sense, and are they marks that I find pleasing. And so, but again, you're going to have your own kind of threshold for what that means, for how accurate you want that to be. And one of the things that also comes to mind is that horizon line. It can often feel very harsh and sharp, but really study what you're seeing in the reference photo and notice that there's actually a fairly soft transition along that edge. I feel like I'm heightening it a little bit too much, but I don't want it to be a hard line across the entire horizon line there. I'm going to play around with that and use a sharp edge kind of strategically to control the viewer's gaze. So where along that horizon line might I want a sharper edge to bring that viewer's view? Colleen switched to white chalk. Awesome. What's the name of this paper? This is a Somerset. So I listed that in the description below. So if you go to Legion Paper, I think it's legionpaper.com, so you can find a list of all their materials, all their paper. And this is their Somerset that I'm using here. Yeah, I enjoy it. I really like, I really enjoy rag papers. The Rives BFK has always been a good performer for me. Coventry rag, the Pesha again has worked out really well. This Somerset is a little bit lighter weight, and I kind of held off using it for a little while, and then when I did, I'm like, wait, I really like this. I don't know. I don't know. I think I need a little bit more time to articulate why. I think that could be important, but there is a feeling to it. And I think in part because it does erase down to a fairly bright white, not a pure white, but it lifts the material really well. And there's just a softness to it. It's that right balance between allowing to create smooth, soft transitions as well as sharp edges. There are some papers that have a tooth to them that can be difficult to manage, and some that don't really have enough tooth, and then a lot of it depends again what material you're using. Bring out this blending stump here to see what happens. I'm going to be thinking kind of about the flow of the waves. So there we see this first row of waves here, and I'm looking at the shapes to see if there are any clues that will help me to describe the flow of the waves. So I'm looking at the shapes of the light and dark. And what you notice is there's along each wave there's this range of values where it's a little bit lighter in this lower part. As you come up the crest, it gets really dense, and it's the way the light passes through that shape of the wave. So where it gets really dark, and then there's like this light line across the top, and then so what I'm looking for is that. And then how the shapes change as we move from left to right. So again, as we move across to the left, they start to kind of lengthen out a little bit as we're looking across them more. And as we look at the sea foam here, the dark areas kind of take on the kind of almost a teardrop type shape. These thin, kind of like a seed in a way. So part of what I'm thinking about here is just allowing the marks to go with the flow of the wave. And as we come across, the shape of the wave changes, so the marks change in accordance with that. So I don't want to keep these marks and move them over here. I need to change the direction of my marks to reinforce the movement of the waves. With this being off to our right, then the shape of these waves change accordingly. So just in an abstract way, do the marks create a feeling of movement? Oh no, Tammy was saying the live chat was hiding from me. I'm glad you found it. Blending stumps versus tower paper. I don't know what tower paper, like our paper towel, is that? I wonder what you're referring to there. So I have my paper towel, and I use that really more in the early stages to kind of create a layer, kind of smooth things out a little bit. And then the blending stump really becomes more of a descriptive tool. So, I mean, the paper towel, because it's larger, you always want to use a tool in a way that's going to help you to reinforce the form of the subject. You're describing something. With that, whatever tool you're using, you're always having an opportunity to describe something. So with a paper towel, it's just a bigger tool, and so it has less of an ability to describe kind of finer forms. With the blending stump, you are smoothing out the paper, but it allows me to describe kind of finer shapes as we go through. And so and I find that it's a great way to kind of sneak up on some forms. As I'm trying to figure out this negative space that creates the cresting wave here, it's just a softer mark that I can then refine later with the eraser and with more graphite. So now I can come back in here, for example, and refine that form. So what I'm looking at is that triangular shape. And it's not quite the shape that I'm seeing in the reference. But so what I've done is I've made this edge more vertical to kind of as a compositional decision here, again, to create an implied edge along in there. And it's all very subtle, and it may not lead to anything. It may not be all that critical, but sometimes you got to try out some of these little things to see if it does. So then I can create a contrast between this shape here, this triangular shape, and then this triangular shape that I can draw out a little bit to the left to kind of create that pull across there. And then Sandra, I say, am I the only one who would prefer a larger reference image even to the loss of the drawing? Yeah, it's funny, reference images are, so I have one here that's blown up, so the one that I provided, it should be working about to the same resolution, but it's a full monitor screen that is taking up over here. And I have the small thumbnail, and I kind of am working back and forth between the two. They each kind of give me a little bit different information. But that's a really good question to see what we each prefer. I think if I had to choose, I would probably go with the smaller one. If I could only work with one image, and I don't know why that is specifically, but all right. So just gradually moving through the composition. Yeah, so what I'm observing right now is that, you know, when I allow my eyes to move back and forth quickly, when we looked at the DaVinci Eye app a couple weeks ago, they have that strobe feature which allows the reference image to kind of come in and out, and you can compare that to your drawing. I don't have that app open right now. So what I'm just doing is on the screen that you're seeing, I'm moving my eyes back and forth between the reference image and the drawing. And the thing that really stands out to me is how these waves have been brought forward. So you can see that there's a greater distance here. If we look at the relationship between these three elements right here, I've kind of flipped that ratio so that these two are closer and there's a greater distance here. In the reference, it's flipped. And I'm evaluating whether or not I like that. I think I want to bring this up. So I'm just going to kind of subtract that out. Bring that wave up. And try to make a quick editorial decision there to see if that does anything. I just want to push that around now, move that back up, see how that reads. I think I like that better, and I can continue to refine this shape. But I think I like having it smaller and push back a little bit. And now it emphasizes the slant, bringing this down forward. So I might bring this crashing wave here as a light form, bring that forward a little bit more, keep that where it is, and maybe push that back. There we go. It's just kind of the mood I'm in today, is just to move the material around. So relatively quickly was able to make a compositional change that I think is better for the image. And now there's that second row of waves. And I can again do some subtractive drawing. I think I need to break up this stretching along here and start to suggest some waves there. So just moving quickly as I kind of move horizontally, letting it bite on the page a little in kind of random areas to help suggest more of those distant waves. Actually, let me take that out. That one's bothering me now. I don't know if that feels better. All right, so how's everybody's drawing coming? Anybody stuck? I feel like this is evolving a little bit differently than some of our past drawings, which is exciting because that's what this show is all about, is kind of, I don't know, challenging ourselves in new ways. So let's see. All right. Just reading some of those comments there, and it's hard for me to follow, but it sounds like there's some good exchange happening, talking about how the references are being used. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, so that was not an intentional mark at first, but I liked it because what it does is it just creates that visual, kind of that triangle there, and then I see that it starts to mimic there's like this, with that crashing wave, there are these bubbles under the water that are creating that light quality that transition into the dark. So what I'm feeling this drawing is ultimately becoming about is kind of just allowing the materials to do their things and having fun with the mark making and being almost more abstract with it than anything. All right, there's this. So what I like about the blending stump for creating some of these darker marks in the waves is that it, with the shape of it, that natural curve going into that point, it naturally kind of lends itself to these, again, these kind of seed-like shapes that form the dark areas. And then what I'm going to be doing is looking at the balance, the way those light and those dark areas are integrated together. If this were paint, then I might be thinking about it in terms of wet on wet painting, allowing those areas to kind of lock together in the brushwork. So working back and forth between the shapes that the blending stumps are making in those dark areas, and then using the eraser to suggest and describe some of these trails of sea foam that trace down the shape of the wave. Diane B13, what would you say is the weight of this paper compared to a copy paper? Oh, that's a good question. I mean, this is definitely a heavier weight paper. It's. Do I have a sheet of it here? Yeah, I think this is the same one. So I don't know if by bending it you can see that it. I don't know if that helps to describe the weight of the paper a little bit, but it's fairly flexible. It can kind of crimp somewhat easily, so you want to be a little careful with it. But it's definitely got a heavier weight than copy paper. So as I'm working with the eraser in the subtractive way, again, thinking about when I'm looking at the reference photo, I'm thinking about where am I, what is the scale of the shapes, and what is the general direction of the shapes, rather than trying to describe every kind of seafoam streak across the wave. I'm trying to understand it more from a global perspective, thinking about if in this region of the reference photo, how are the shapes different here than over here versus back here. All right, and in allowing, again, that hand-eye coordination to come into play, where I'm just kind of reacting to those forms. And then as we move back, once we get past this initial wave, then that we lose a lot of that detail back in there. So we don't have to describe quite as much. At least that's my kind of take on it. But there are areas, so this is kind of a middle tone that I'm creating, and so there are areas of lighter and darker tones within those waves. I'll come back in with some of the darker areas. Just kind of describing that for myself. So being able to talk through it, just a lot of the benefit to me is that it just helps to organize my thoughts and kind of stick to a strategy, because sometimes I can get really scattered when I'm drawing and just kind of jump around. So as I articulate it audibly, it helps me to stay organized. I don't know, anybody else talk to themselves? I do. Or sometimes what I'll do is if you get lost, and if you have a particularly complex subject, if I have my reference image over here, what I'll do is I'll just point to the area that I'm studying, and keep pointing to it, so then when I glance at the reference photo, I know exactly where I'm going, what area I'm working on, to try to stay organized in my brain. Or I'll talk to myself, say I'm working on the waves here, and I'm studying the shapes. These shapes have kind of a spider webby quality to them. And I'm allowing the eraser here to, I'm just kind of moving it, adjusting it, rocking it, rolling it into different forms, simply reacting to the shapes that I see on the page. And not really trying to describe it and lock in on it too quickly, just trusting the shapes. And then internally chastising myself when I make marks that are, I just went like this, for example. Those eraser marks don't describe anything. I just did them, right? And so then I kind of internally chastise myself and say, what was that all about? Try to describe something with each of your marks, but recognize that that's just another step to move across, and don't get hung up on any kind of mistakes, or try not to beat yourself up. I spent far too many years beating myself up. But I tend to default to the thought that, when we, as viewers, what we're reacting to in a piece of artwork is the feeling of the connection the artist has made with the material. Those marks convey something about the artist. So just engaging with the material qualities can be so much about, in terms of the reaction that the viewer is going to have. So just, if you enjoy the marks, have fun making those marks, the viewer will be able to really appreciate that. Even if it's not really describing the subject as clearly as you might like, if it has pleasing marks, that can make it for a wonderful experience for the viewer. And if there are marks that kind of show a bit of the mind of the artist behind them, that gets exciting. So as I'm working in this area with the blending stump, I'm thinking about there are two directions to the marks. There's this kind of sloping up this way, and there's movement back this way, to kind of describe the two dimensions of that three-dimensional object. There's this part of the plane, and there's that part of the plane. So there are some marks that I drag up in that direction, and the others that I drag crosswise this way. And allow them to kind of interlock with one another. There's a lot of debris on this, a lot of erasing, so there's a lot of eraser debris. I have this, I don't know if you guys seen this fun little eraser, this accurate little eraser. A vacuum that picks up the eraser bits. It's a fun little tool. All right, what am I doing now? I'm gonna kind of just switch back and forth. I haven't used much of the graphite pencil to define these forms, so I'm still using the blending stump and the eraser a bit more. And then I'm going to sharpen edges with the graphite as we go along. Now, I think I'm going to leave this a little less defined. So I'm just kind of testing out to see, do I have enough information to describe this? Is it distractingly unfinished, or is it suitably unfinished? Those are the questions that I'm running through my head. I'd be kind of curious for you all, like what are the primary directives that you give yourself? Like, how do you evaluate your work? You know, I think we all have our own set of criteria with which we evaluate our works, and that's part of what sets us each apart from one another. You know, is it light, value, form, shape, texture, proportion? Is there emotional quality? All right, here we go. Okay, now, how are we doing on time? Ooh, we're already an hour and 20 minutes in. We started off strong, and I feel like I'm kind of slowing things down. All right, this next step, I'm going to kind of finish the waves here a little bit. I'm going to start from that background, evaluating first that horizon line. Does it feel good? Kind of like that. Now, as I let my eyes lose focus, I look at the reference image, I realize that it gets really dark over here, kind of in this central band. So I'm going to take this, I'll take the 3B here. So I have my 6B, or I'm sorry, 8B that I have for my darkest darks that I'm going to use for the rock. So I'm going to go pretty dark, and I'm just using the side of the pencil. And this is where I really need to rely on the screen in front of me, because these marks that I'm making, I can't see from this angle. The light is catching it, so it looks like I'm not doing anything. When I look up at the screen, I see that I've actually laid down some darker marks. So that's what I'm going to actually be referring to. That's what's going to guide my decisions at this point. It's one of the things about graphite that can be challenging is that it is more reflective than charcoal, and so I'm not really able to see. Now I can see it. Right now, again, I wasn't really thinking through that when I set up the lights here in my little studio. So so as I'm doing this, I'm kind of thinking about the perspective more than anything. So again, kind of thinking through the shapes of the waves. And these are all very small marks because, you know, we're dealing with things that are very far away. But regardless of the scale of the marks, they can reinforce the perspective. They can reinforce the plane of these waves. And one of the things we learn about the wave in the foreground is how we get darker right up here near the crest of the wave, and then you have the white caps that come in on top. So you get a higher degree of contrast right in there. If I take that same understanding back here, then I can recognize that, say, this wave back here, where it's cresting, also gets darker right up to that edge. So again, just keep making the same observations, but just on a smaller scale. And just as we were talking about the direction of the marks here, reinforcing kind of two planes of that surface, we can do that with these small marks here. They can reference kind of a vertical paint plane, or kind of the scooping plane, as well as the horizontal, that lateral plane here, there. So holding the side of the pencil allows me to kind of create these broad marks, and just kind of rolling a little bit when you need a finer, sharper edge. Susan is asking if I use different stumps for charcoal and graphite. I do. I have them divided here in my old studio thing. So I have my graphite on one side, charcoal on the other, and I only use the charcoal stumps for charcoal drawings. I say only, but I have on more than one occasion grabbed the wrong one, and then I just roll with it. So I'm often not as careful with some of those things as I could be. So sometimes it works. So these darker marks, you can see that there's like this shift in tone. You know, you have dark and then darker. And so again, I'm evaluating now the direction of my marks to see does it describe something about the waves and that feels somewhat natural. Thinking about that change in perspective again, look as though our point of view is here. We're looking to the right and to the left, and then the marks change accordingly. Let me give myself just a little bit of an indication over here of stuff. All right, so now as we come closer, you know, so I didn't count the rows of waves. I didn't, but I'm looking kind of globally at the scene. Does it create a sense of that depth moving across the surface of the ocean? Now as we move up here, we have these two rows of waves that are a bit sharper and clearer. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time with them. And you'd notice, like, you know, we have these larger rolls of the waves, and then each of those is covered in these tiny wave forms as well. So it's not, I'm not filling in a large swath of dark tone. I'm looking at these kind of wedge-like forms on each of those waves. And as we come down, at the bottom of the wave, it flattens out and it's reflecting more of that sky, so you get a little bit lighter. As the wave comes up and we're looking through kind of that dense wave where we're not getting that reflection from the sky, it gets darker. And you can, you know, one of the videos we have actually quite a few videos on Artist Network that address painting waves, and you learn a lot. You know, Don Demers, Jeannie Rossier-Smith, we've got a lot of videos there where you can you learn the anatomy, the structure of waves, and it can be really, really fun to study those things if you're interested in looking at those. Moving back and forth, trying not to get stuck in any one particular area. And I'm letting the pencil roll in my fingers as I go, so I'm not developing a flat spot on the core of the pencil. And kind of doing some negative drawing. So thinking about the shape of that sea foam as it crests over there by drawing the dark spot. So in this way, throughout this drawing, I haven't really drawn any lines, right? I'm only just doing shapes of value. And as looking down here, we're seeing the sea foam that's kind of scattered across that horizontal plane. So much can be kind of described just by identifying what the angle of the plane is, and then allowing the marks to kind of land along those marks as best you can. But sometimes just being aware of the angle of the plane can reveal the marks that you need. I need a few more transitional waves moving back along in here. So there are these, what I'm observing now is that we can feel the presence of those front rows of waves there, but it's not a continual, like, one long kind of tube cresting wave. It's broken up. And so what I'm trying to do is really study that relationship here and observe how the direction of the marks change from this wave here that's cresting in that foreground, and then right behind us, and they change direction here. So it's ultimately going to be that change in direction that the viewer is going to perceive that will imply the edge of that cresting wave in the foreground. All right. Let's see. Class Tahana says, mostly value in whether there's nothing off distorting the general image, but that's rather abstract, I guess. I think that's a good way of pointing out, you know, I'm really glad that you guys are sharing some of the things that you use to evaluate your work. Greg is saying, I feel like one of my drawings is successful if I feel like I say what I want to say about the subject, if it jumps off the page, and if I think it looks good. I mean, that describes it really well. Diane B13 is saying, a blending stump is perfect for doing the foam. Thanks. Excellent. And then Mary C is saying, criteria, did I see something in the scene that I would not have noticed if I had not drawn it? Do I appreciate others' art more as a result of drawing myself? That's a great way of saying it. I think I align with what you're saying a lot, Mary, is that, you know, drawing for me is a way to engage with this subject. It engages with our own visual system, and it allows us to kind of slow down and evaluate what is happening in the scene, because our brains are designed to very quickly interpret the things that are around us and help us understand what do we do with this. Is this something we need to run away from? Is it something that we need to engage with? Is it, you know, what kind of quickly what should be our response to the subject? And all those steps that our brain takes to evaluate the subject is often hidden from us, from our conscious minds. It stays kind of rooted in the subconscious. And so by slowing down and really asking, well, how do we understand this? Like, what are the shapes, values, forms, textures, lines that our brain has interpreted for us to walk away with this understanding that these are crashing waves. You know, we can tell by these forms that what the intensity of these waves are, what the speed might be, what the wind and the weather conditions might be, kind of enforcing the scene here. So doing some kind of positive and negative drawing here, just looking at the edges. So you know, using these dark marks to refine the negative space of those white forms. I think right in here I need to add a little bit more kind of detail, more refinement to describe that. I need that wave because that helps describe that wave. So this is my primary objective. And as a supporting character, I need a little bit more description from that wave behind it. Trying to stay out of the shot there. My head doesn't dip in front of it, but now I have some contrast and value. Actually, I'm going to bring in my mechanical eraser. Again, just kind of letting it skip across the surface. It's playing a role in the marks and the understanding of the scene there. Kind of letting it do what it does. But, it's kind of fun just letting the eraser just kind of, again, just kind of skip and dart across the surface, and it's implying some things that in a way that I think is more effective than if I were to really try to tightly control the marks. Using that power of suggestion to to kind of work in our favor here. All right, whew. Tammy, I love your comment. Scott, could you not have found anything else so easy and yet so hard? Yeah, I don't know why I was drawn to the scene, this photo. I posted the link to the on Pixabay to the photographer who took this. I need to start doing that with more diligence. But great scene. There's just something about the arrangement of lights and darks. Uh-oh. Dropped my mic pack there. Yeah, I just think it was, yeah, it looked like an interesting challenge. I think, you know, for me, again, there's so much happening. It just kind of forces me to have to just step back and kind of reduce the amount of control with which I apply to the drawing, because there's just too much information for me to try to describe everything accurately. So I have to rely on just the materials kind of doing their own thing and seeing if it can help me. Use the tooth of the paper, the shape of the pencil, the aggressiveness of the eraser, and see if it can create marks that will help me, because I don't think I have the ability to kind of do it all with a fine degree of control. I have to use that suggestion, and it kind of forces my hand because it's so complex. So as I kind of manipulate this, I'm again using the side of the pencil, thinking about the flow of the seafoam there, the shapes of the darks. So rather than creating a line and filling it in, I'm trying to describe these shapes kind of relatively simply, in the way that, you know, just a few marks to see what it describes and then move on. Try not to control it. I think we did another crashing wave very early on in the series. So we're at, I actually can't remember what episode. Was this 107, I think? We've done a lot of episodes now, but there early on we did a crashing wave that, if you're frustrated by this one but still want to do some sort of ocean scene, you might check that out. Kind of squinting, closing one eye even, to just really reduce. There's so much information here. I'm trying to reduce that down because there's just too much to take in and try to manage. This does make me want to do some abstract work. For some reason, I think just because of the overall abstract quality of the scene. All right, so now as we move over here, we have some loose marks that are established by the blending stump, but now we can kind of refine them a little bit more using this. This is the B, actually, so it's not. It's kind of the harder one. Sorry, this is just requiring a little bit more focus, so I'm not talking quite as much, but I think what I want to do is I need more of that sea foam to kind of describe the curve of the wave, especially right in here, and how it how it kind of changes pitch. So one of the things, there's so much graphite on this paper now that when I'm erasing, I'm just starting with a light pressure, and it's moving that graphite around and then leaning in on it in some other areas to pull off some, and that's what's creating kind of the suggestion of these light areas, the seafoam. I think I want to bring that wave forward a little bit more. So I'm bringing off a little bit of light that catches on the crest of that wave, and then darken back in here. There, I think that works out all right. All right, whew. All right, Tammy, I'm glad you were able to catch up. Thank you, Diane. At Moments Go said it looks like a desert. Oh, interesting. Yeah, and Carol is saying we did that iceberg in that tinted charcoal, and I don't know why I kind of forget about that tinted charcoal. It's good stuff. So thank you for reminding me to use that. Got tinted graphite as well. It'd be kind of fun. And Jackie's going to use water-soluble graphite for another. Awesome. Yeah, so again, anybody if you're drawing along, I'd love to see the work. If you'll find the link to the page on Artist Network where you can share your work. That's in the description, and I also pinned it to the top of the chat. So look for that. When you're done, share your work. Saw some really great fish drawings, so I have that up. Yeah, there's the fish drawing. We did that last week, so that was a lot of fun. I saw some amazing drawings and paintings. Some paintings were posted too, so. All right, now I feel like there's a sufficient amount of structure to the whole seascape. What's missing is a rock, so let's put that rock in. I'm gonna stick with the B pencil. So what I'm gonna do first is try to block that in as a kind of solid shape. Then we're going to drop in the shadows and then erase out the highlights. We're going to create kind of a middle tone. My goal right now is to refine this form a little bit. So now I can start to work from the center of the form outward to find the structure, look for some sharp edges. It's a little challenging trying to contort myself. You know, I could start to dig into the the complex shape along in here. You see all those layers in the rock that now we can describe. And so kind of working back and forth from the center of the form to the edge, and then back to create a solid shape there. And I'm just going to kind of suggest that form. There's the details aren't quite lining up, but that's all right. I want to move this drawing along. This is where you might be so inclined as to really match the specific details of the rock there. But I'm going to move that along, observing there's this plane here, and then that's obstructed by this. Now this is where, when we're drawing this rock, the contrast between the sharp, clean edges of this rock will help to suggest the movement and the fluidity of the water behind it. So this contrast can be really helpful. So if this drawing is about the waves, sometimes having a form like a solid rock to contrast the waves helps to reveal more about really that focal point. So I'm not spending, again, not spending a whole lot of time with the proportions here. And so I'm just kind of glancing back and forth, working my way from left to right. But I need to also step back and take in the whole of it to make sure that I'm not kind of way out of whack in terms of the proportions here. But you know, because of that initial gesture, I'm kind of sticking to that initial gestural form, but allowing some variations to play out here. I think if given more time, I might make a different choice. I might really try to lock in on these forms here, but I don't know as if that's going to give you really anything new to work with. All right, so when you're working, especially along the edge, when you're confronted with the water, you know, we have what's going to ultimately create this form is that contrast between this edge that overlaps the white sea foam behind it, that wave behind there, and you come down here and now that white is on top of that rock. So we have that alternating relationship that we need to in some way express. And so as I'm going through, I might be kind of working back and forth between those two. And so what you see here is, you know, we're thinking kind of positive against the negative space here. And now we're thinking kind of negatively here. So when we're making those dark marks, we're working on that negative space against the white shape of that foam. Hopefully that kind of makes sense there, and by calling that to mind, it might help you to see the form in a different way. But again, I'm trying to look at the shape of the darks to see what information that gives me about the waves. So if I just kind of flick and drag and allow the tooth of the paper to show here, that starts to suggest the spray of the white sea foam on top of it. And then as we move down here, you see kind of these longer strands of the water. So I might change the direction of my mark here to try to capture that. So, but what I'm evaluating is, as I make these marks, does it feel like now the white is on top of the dark marks there? Does it read as that sea foam? And you know, again, this kind of relating this to painting. You know, there are these times when you have one mark that you pull down and another one that you pull into it, and then you're bringing these marks kind of interacting and overlapping with one another until they kind of lock together. And that's kind of what I'm doing here as well. I don't have the ability to lay on a kind of that lighter gray, white kind of color to bring that sea foam on top of the shadowy rock here, but so I have to be thinking about positive and negative space, additive and subtractive drawing. So hopefully that makes sense. If anybody gets stuck in that part, let me know and I'll see if I can help you through it. And as always, if there's anything here that, any suggestions you might have for me that would improve this, let me know. So as we come down here, one of the things I also want to be aware of is the relationship between light and shadow. So down in here we have some white sea foam, but it's not as light in value as some of these other areas that are catching, you know, whatever light. It's a pretty overcast day, but still there are stronger areas of light and shadow that we can capture here. So right in here, for example, we've got some of that sea foam, but it's in shadow more. And so I just need to be a little bit more delicate with the marks. So the initial passes on here, the eraser is really just smudging and moving things around, and I'm just allowing those textures to do what they do, and then build the shapes around that rather than trying to force them into the specific shapes I'm seeing in the reference photo. So now I can darken in some of these areas here, and that contrast suggests a lighter kind of sea foam in shadow there. Now, if you need to kind of sharpen up some of that sea foam, like in this area, you can kind of bring in just the kind of the tip of the pencil a little bit in some of these areas, but be selective with it. All right, so now I have the 3B. Let's see. Let me smooth that out. I want to refine the edge here using the eraser. Ooh. I've loaded up so much graphite on this eraser. Actually, what I'm going to do is carve that down. Just going to cut off the end, give myself another kind of chisel tip, nice clean eraser. I waste a lot of eraser doing that, but I find it really helpful to just carve the eraser to give myself the shape that I want. And in this case, I want really clean edges. Now, one of the things that you can also evaluate as you're looking at the relationship between the shape of the rock and the waves behind it, we want that rock to come in on top of those waves. And when we think about spatial relationships between forms and creating an overlap, things that are kind of convex, that push into a space, will tend to project forward. So in this case, we have this curve here. That's going to pop up off of the page. And then if here, for example, we're seeing some of the waves actually crashing in on top of the rock. So by switching to that, now the rock is concave, the waveform is convex, that waveform is now going to project forward. And so we can use that to our advantage in this area here where the waves are on top of the rocks, is bring in marks that push into that form. That'll lift it and make it feel like it's on top of the rock underneath it. And then kind of reserve these marks here, make them more convex, to pushing in on top of that form behind it. So hopefully that makes sense. But looking at the relationship between those shapes, that can sometimes really pull a drawing together. Where's the? Is this it? Here's the 8B. I'm going to go for the darkest dark that I have. Like I had the 12B here, but I don't have that sharpened. So it's the darkest that I have sharpened. And I just, I think I was too kind of aggressive with my sharpening there. So what I'm doing now is creating the shapes of those shadow forms, looking for those darkest dark areas. This is where you can really spend some time to focus on that specific shape, the forms of the rocks there, but I'm going to try to suggest it so that we can move this drawing along. And now that whole form was dark, but by going even darker, those dark areas now take on a quality of as though light is striking that. So squinting your eyes helps to reduce the detail and show the value relationships perhaps a bit more effectively. So if you're having trouble seeing the shadow shapes, try squinting your eyes. You're not getting kind of caught up in all the details, all those fine cracks and crevices in the rocks. Try to get those main forms established. I'm going to bounce around the drawing here. And this is where, you might, again, let the drawing take over in some areas. You start to see shapes of rocks form that don't align with the reference. I'm not seeing these specific forms there, but they're close. They're informed by the shapes that we see here. And now this, another way to help bring the sea foam forward here, we have this shape of that water there, bringing the darks that cut into it at a kind of a sharp angle there creates some visual separation that will hopefully bring that white area forward. And then this, like as I come down here, I'm kind of leaning a little bit on that side, letting the outer edge of the mark get a little bit diffused to suggest that sea foam there. So playing around with the pressure, where you're applying the pressure to help suggest that space. I don't have the white material out right now to draw that white foam in on top, so I have to use that negative space in order to suggest that sea foam. I have to do it in such a way that it still projects forward. Suggest some of the direction of the kind of the grain of that rock there. All right, so that's starting to suggest a bit of a light and shadow. Now you can come in with the eraser and pull off some of the lighter areas a little bit. And be a little careful about bringing the light right up to the edge. So we have a lot of white around the rock with the sea foam. If I bring this eraser mark right up to that edge, I might lose that form, and then you can just smudge, and that way you can knock that value down. If you pull up too much value there, you can always just kind of smudge it. You can get it back. So I'm going to just use the eraser, kind of quickly just let it jump across the areas where the light is striking it a little bit more. Let it suggest some texture there. So in this way, I'm just really having more fun with the mark making that's informed by the landscape rather than really trying to control it, more for the benefit of time right now. I think I spent a little bit more time really refining the rocks in the preparatory drawing. But I kind of like the way there's this tendril of sea foam working its way through the cracks here. I'll make it go like that. That does a lot to describe that in the reference photo. That does a lot to describe the structure of the rock there. And seeing all sorts of compositional, or not compositional, but proportional issues with it, but it's all right. Some areas here where that sea foam is kind of dripping down out from between the cracks and crevices. So I think we're kind of nearing the end here. I think this has been a lot of fun just making marks, trying to suggest detail rather than be overly descriptive. Hopefully it captures the scene effectively. How are we doing? Oh my gosh, it's been just about 2 hours, which is a good target to have. And now, looking at it now, I can evaluate, does it, when I go back to my original plan in terms of the composition, to have these 3 areas where there is more of a definable form, is that working? Other areas where I can bring things into sharper focus or relax the focus a little bit. I think I do want to give a little bit more structure to this form. So doing some negative drawing with a sharper edge to just create a little bit more solidity. Some place where we can latch on to these these forms, I think can be really helpful. So, all right, and here, you know, I can come in and just use kind of a line selectively to bring a layer of sharpness. But be very selective with it. So I think that's about it. I might work on this a little bit more off camera, we'll see. But I think I've done all, you know, shown that all that really goes into it. The rest is just continually refining, doing what I've been doing this whole time. So I want to thank you all for joining me. Again, we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. Oh, yeah, I do have next week's drawing all done. This is what we're doing next week. It's focusing on architecture, doing these arches. I might work on this a little bit more to create a little bit more texture. Oh, I can put it right here. But, you know, so look for that. I think I built the page already so you can see it if you want to find the reference image and start practicing that. That's what we're working on next week, using that same paper. This is that Somerset rag again. I have all the materials listed in the description below. I would love to see your drawings, so if you share them on Artist Network, again, the link is pinned to the top of the chat and it's in the description below the video. I do want to make sure I got all of the questions answered. Looks like there's no real questions. Awesome. Demanche Dave, let's say, do you have charcoal spray or graphite spray? I do have some somewhere, but I don't typically use a fixative for these because these are really just exercises. They're studies and ways to develop my skills. If I were to do something that I might want to present, I would probably spray fix it, but the best thing to do would be to put it behind glass, to actually have it framed with a mat. And so I kind of just try to be careful with these somewhat. And you might, if you're storing them, you might put a sheet of like Mylar or something in between them to help preserve them, lay them flat. And just what can really mess them up is if they kind of shake around and rub against one another. So if you have a nice flat file, something like that, then yeah, kind of do that. Spray, like I said, spray fixative can be good, but I don't spend a lot of time working with them. So, all right, Joan, I'm glad that the positive and negative drawing on the rock was effective for you. All right, good night from Israel. Awesome. It's awesome to see people from all over. Sylvia, way too difficult. Oh, I'm glad you gave it a shot. It's you know, you never know how things are going to come out. Sometimes things that look easy can be hard. Sometimes things that look really hard are hard. Some things that, you know, you never know. So I'm glad you took a stab at it. Tammy, your Artist Magazine just came in. Great. So yeah, if you're Artist Network members, you get access to all our videos as well as Artist Magazine for a great price there. So I love looking through the magazine. It's a lot of fun. So, all right, looks like all the questions have come in. So I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for joining me. It's been a wonderful Wednesday, and I cannot wait till next week when we get to do it all again with the arches. So tell everybody, show up. I think it'll be a lot of fun.